Hello everyone, welcome back to a new episode of The Fact, the series that discusses political international issues every week. In this episode, we would like to talk about the deal of the century, which is basically orchestrated by the United States of America and President Trump. And we would like to talk about different outcomes and aspects of this deal. We have two respected guests from the United States of America and also Australia. We have Mr. Paul Lordy. He is a political activist and founder of Free Gaza movement. He's joining us from USA, and also Mr. Paul Antonopoulos. He is also a political commentator and activist. I would like to welcome both of you to the program. Okay, I would like to go into my first question, which is basically the final goal that President Trump is seeking by just going into such a deal and making the deal of the century. And I really would like to know about the things that he is trying to seek and he tries to achieve by such a deal with Israel.
We know that Trump has, since the beginning of his administration, allied himself very strongly with the most extreme Zionists. So we can expect that this so-called deal of the century will be totally in line with those the objectives of those Zionists. And that's exactly what's happening. It is basically pushing forward the Zionist dream of a territory with only Jews in it and nothing non-Jewish about its character or even its history. It is attempting to obliterate its history. So the deal of the century is a very strong attempt to bring all of this to fruition and to once again constrict Palestinians even more than before to smaller spaces, to tighter restrictions, to fewer resources. Basically, it's an attempt to eliminate them and to get them to leave, or to get them to die, for that matter, to provoke them into doing something that will cause even greater reaction by the Zionist forces against them. So this is, Trump is very aware of the influence, the very strong Zionist influence in the U.S. And so he's attempting to use that as much as he can. He has decided that an alliance between him and the Zionists is in his interest to accomplish many other things.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Lordy. I would like to also ask you another question, which is basically the possibilities about any kind of contradictions between this deal and international laws. Do you think such a deal would, contradict any kind of international law or treaty? And if so, would you please explain about this?
Obviously, the so-called deal of the century is not based on international law, except in the sense that it is against international law, as it breaks almost every international law that it can break. The occupation of Palestinian land, the taking of Palestinian land, the restrictions against Palestinians, the blockade of Gaza, the checkpoints, the impediments to Palestinian autonomy and economy and all of these things are all against international law. So it's clear that that Israel and the United States are both care nothing for international law and are intervening. And in the case of the United States, This is also clear from its other foreign policy initiatives, and for that matter, Israel as well. So the application of international law has no bearing on either the deal of the century or anything else that has to do with the policy of the United States or Israel.
Okay, thank you. What about global reaction toward this deal? What is your analysis about general reactions that you have seen from different people in different countries, and the general reaction that in global aspect we're seeing right now? What is your analysis about this?
The United States and Israel and Trump in particular don't much care for the global reaction to the so-called deal of the century. Their experience tells them that no matter what criticism they face from around the world, there are no countries in the world that will actually do anything or do enough to cause them any harm or restrict them in any way. So the global reaction is, you can say, very critical. There are many countries that are on the side of the Palestinians and against the Israelis, and even those that are not explicitly against the Israelis feel that, if you like, the treatment is that they've gone too far, that the Israelis have gone too far, that their reaction is disproportionate, and this kind of wording, which is very mild compared to what's actually the case. Almost everything that Israel does is against the law, against international law. So the global reaction, Israel and the United States are expecting that the global reaction will be to criticize them, even to condemn them. But there will be no practical consequences to any of this, so why should they care? This is basically the attitude that they've had all along. It's only when there have been practical consequences, such as, you have to look very far back for this, but when Eisenhower suspended aid to Israel because of its taking the Sinai from Egypt. At that point, Israel returned the Sinai to Egypt, and those are the only cases where Israel will react, when there's some practical consequence that they fear more than world condemnation for what they do. And I don't see any reaction of that kind coming forward. The Zionists are too powerful in the United States to permit that to happen. And you need the acquiescence, at least, and the approval, preferably, of the Israel lobby and the Zionist movement in the United States in order to succeed in politics. So the global reaction on this, we can expect it once again to be words and not deeds against the so-called deal of the century.
Okay, thank you so much for the explanation. Now I would like to go into another dimension and aspect of this event, which is the support coming from Arab countries. As you know, Bahrain and Emirates showed their support toward this so-called deal of the century. What is the reason behind that? So, Mr. Antonopoulos, would you please explain about this?
Many of the Arab countries are compromised and have completely abandoned the Palestinian struggle. They are now focusing on opposing Iran under the guise of sectarianism. I do not believe that these Arab countries believe in a Sunni and Shia sectarian conflict, but use this narrative to utilize radical forces like Al-Qaeda and ISIS to attack Iran with the reason of sectarianism. Iran opposes sectarianism and it opposes US imperialism in the region, while many of these Arab countries support US imperialism for their own goals. It is for this reason that Iran has become the main focus for these Arab states, with Israel completely sidelined and ignored and forgotten about. As Israel is sidelined, these Arab states have completely abandoned the Palestinian struggle, and rather the Palestinian issue has become a distraction and an ongoing problem that they want resolved, whether it be through the so-called deal of the century or some other compromise between the Palestinians and the Zionist entity. I'll emphasize that again. This has become an ongoing problem, the Palestinian issue, and they just want it resolved in any way possible, which is why I think many of them do support this deal of the century.
All right, thank you. If we go about the possibility of such a deal in future, I mean, if it is basically applicable in the region, do you think such a deal would be generally possible to be applied and executed in a region like Middle East or not?
The US knows the so-called deal of the century would be completely rejected by the Palestinians and also by the other major regional powers in the region, such as Iran and even Turkey. It was never the intentions for this deal to become possible, but rather a mechanism to portray the Palestinians as uncompromising and irrational in trying to resolve the Palestinian issue, with the Palestinians portrayed as uncompromising to the international community. Israel can continue its expansion for the eventual goal of stealing all the lands from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in Iraq, and that's especially with American backing. It is for this reason that the US supports the Israeli annexation of Syria's Golan Heights, swallowing up the West Bank, and continued aggression against resistance forces, whether they be in Lebanon, or whether they be in Syria, or whether they be in Iraq, or any other country in the region.
All right, thank you. As you know, just nearly a month ago, General Soleimani and also Abu Mahdi al-Muhandas were assassinated by USA government in Iraq. I would like to know if there would be any kind of special change in the course of or in the situation of resistance bloc in the Middle East and in the region. And if so, do you think that this changes the freedom, process of Gaza and Palestine in general would be possible or faster or slower? What is your analysis about the possibility of the freedom that we're seeking?
Iran was fully prepared for the martyrdom of General Soleimani, and his martyrdom will make no difference to resistance efforts. Cultures and theological teachings of martyrdom ensures that the assassination of one person cannot hinder efforts of resistance. Currently, we are seeing the Syrian army defeating jihadist forces in Idlib province, rapidly liberating vast areas of the province from Turkish-backed jihadists. Soleimani's martyrdom has not at all affected these efforts to defeat Turkish-backed jihadists in Idlib. Hezbollah, they're still fully prepared for whatever is necessary to ensure that the resistance is alive and well all across the region, but especially against Israel. Although the martyrdom of Soleimani has not affected efforts for Palestine's freedom, the harsh truth is that the freedom of Palestine is still far off. It's still a long way away, and this will continue to be far off so long as Arab countries, with the exception of Syria of course, are against the resistance and they are making no efforts for Palestine to be free. They're making absolutely no efforts for them to be free. And as so long as they're disunited and focusing on Iran rather than focusing on Israel, we will not see the liberation of Palestine.
Okay, thank you so much for your informative and fruitful explanations about the subject. And I'm really thankful to both of you, Mr. Antonopoulos and also Mr. Laurdi. And we hope that we can have you again on this program on next episodes. Thank you so much and goodbye.